Welcome to our panel titled Bringing Prosocial Values into Practice. In this panel, we will delve into the final pillar of U.S. Surgeon General's framework to advance social connection, building a culture of connection within ourselves, leaders, communities, and institutions. Drawing from the principles of kindness, respect, service, and commitment to one another, our panelists will help us illuminate how these values can be intentionally cultivated by political and organizational leaders. They will also share strategies for modeling connection values in positions of leadership and influence, highlighting real-world examples of impactful initiatives and policy changes that have fostered cultures of connection. I'm pleased to first welcome our moderator, Josh Penny, Director of Social Impact at Hinge. Love the excitement already. Where he leads efforts to address the loneliness crisis, including their recently launched One More Hour initiative. Joining him are our incredible panelists, including Shoket, previous editor-in-chief at 17 Magazine, current CEO of The List, and founder of 10 Minutes to Togetherness, and leading The List, a nationwide community of high-impact women and underrepresented leaders, and is redefining the intersection of content and community. Next, we have Frederick, who is the Executive Director of Weave, the Social Fabric Project at the Aspen Institute. Weave connects, supports, and invests in local leaders, stepping up to weave a new, inclusive social fabric where they live. Thank you, Frederick. And last but not least, we have Jared Seide, Executive Director of Beyond S&M, a nonprofit organization that fosters social connection by building structures of belonging that promote mutual respect, well-being, and care across sectors. Thank you all for joining us, and Josh, I will pass it to you.
Thank you so much, Lillian. Hi, everyone. How's it going? Welcome. Despite what 3/4 of the panel looks like, this is not a panel on how to grow a great beard. This is the panel on putting pro-social values into practice, and a big thank you to the Coalition to End Social Isolation and Loneliness for having us here today. As Jillian said, my name is Josh Penny. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and I lead social impact for the dating app Hinge. And our app supports people with finding romantic connections, but our social impact work is really about social health more broadly. We find that you can't date well if you're not feeling well, if you're not connected. So this is a really big issue for us. So we're in for a real treat today. We have this incredible group of panelists, and each of whom are doing the big work of putting pro-social values into practice. I'm gonna let y'all introduce yourself in a second, but first, I just want to set the context of our discussion today. It's been a little over a year since the U.S. Surgeon General has released the advisory. Are we calling it the advisory? Is it? Yeah. It's that big, like the advisory. It's a thing. And there's so much wisdom and so many powerful insights in it. But I want to focus today on one particular piece of that advisory from Dr. Murphy. And in it, he wrote, building a culture of connection within ourselves, leaders, communities, and institutions is essential for advancing social connection. So a culture of connection, what does that mean? Well, when I think about culture, I like to think about the things that we collectively share. Culture helps us establish norms, and it helps us know how to interact with each other. And it's made up of many things, not limited to, but the language that we use and the behaviors that we take on. And what we're going to talk about today, actually, are those values and beliefs that we share. It might seem like a stretch in today's world that there are any beliefs and values that we can all share, but we, of course, know that's not true. There's plenty that we do share. And values like kindness and respect and service and commitment to one another are ones that come to mind. And I'd argue that we haven't completely abandoned these values, but rather we're just a little rusty in practicing them. So how do we get better at putting those values into practice? And how do we reinforce these values across communities and across society? That's what we're going to talk about today. At Hinge, we recently launched an initiative called One More Hour that's all about supporting Gen Z, a generation of digital natives, and supporting them in spending more time in person with others. And yesterday, we announced grants to 40 social groups and clubs And these aren't your typical organizations that you make donations to. They're weekly backgammon nights for folks in NYC, or a group of women surfers in LA, or an outdoors group that helps HBCU students to try out hiking and rock climbing for the first time. And what we've been learning for them is that people, it might just seem like these people are gathering to pursue hobbies, but what they're actually doing is the tough work of figuring out how to build community, how to take small actions that make people feel more welcome, and the little follow-ups that reassure others, right? All of these things create spaces where people feel like they belong. Now, Anne, Jared, and Frederick are experts in this very thing, and they've been cultivating communities of their own and helping others do that work too. And so I know we have a lot of policymakers, advocacy folks, researchers in the room. My hope is that today's conversation will give you an opportunity to put your ear close to the ground and walk away with some insights about what it takes to do this work, and to see the types of things that could be scaled up, invested in, or maximized. So to open, I would love for each panelist to introduce yourself and briefly share your connection to the themes that we're going to discuss today. We'll just go down the line and we'll start with you, Jared.
Yeah. Thank you. Wow. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. It is an extraordinary conversation to be in, I think. The organization I have the privilege of leading is called Beyond Us and Them. And as you're speaking, I was thinking about that. It's inspired by the Rumi poem, A Great Wagon. Out beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there's a field. I'll meet you there. And we are an organization that teaches folks to cultivate that field. That's what culture comes from. It's about cultivating something. And so the structures of belonging are the sort of foundation of all the work that we do with system impacted folks inside prisons, lifers, LWOPs, Life Without Parole, folks in reentry, folks who provide services, healthcare providers, educators, and I think in some ways, most interestingly, law enforcement officers. The work we do to resource individuals with the skills and practices that enable them to access their own well-being and connection with others has been a real kind of game changer in terms of folks' ability to connect and stay engaged. I'm thrilled to be able to do this work. There's some really striking research we've been able to do recently, not just qualitative and quantitative, biometric research on how people's physiology, their autonomic nervous system changes when they get together and actually can come into this experience of social connection. And I think it's making folks not only feel more healthy and connected, but it's enabling relationships between adversarial communities to really become shift towards something more wholesome and connected. So I'm really excited to talk about what that culture looks like and how we cultivate that kind of relationship. Oh, you got it.
I think is it on?
Oh, doesn't sound good.
Oh, there you go.
Beyond button. Hi, I'm Anne Shoket. I am CEO of The List and founder of 10 Minutes to Togetherness. I appreciate this question so much of how did you come to this work? Because even as I'm here today, this idea of social connection, social disconnection, loneliness, isolation is such a big topic. And there's so many different angles that we can take. Mine is very personal, and I was very late to the game in figuring this out. As Jillian mentioned, as she introduced me, I have devoted my career to helping women and the next generation step into their power. I was editor-in-chief of 17 magazine. I wrote a book called The Big Life. I acquired The List in 2020. And then around 2022, I read this article in which the Surgeon General, my personal hero, Dr. Murthy, many of you are personal heroes, Dr. Murthy referred to the loneliness epidemic on par with the opioid crisis. And I was like, say what? Like, how is that possible? You're telling me that loneliness, the idea of being alone, of feeling disconnected is as damaging to a human life, to human health and wellness, to society as fentanyl. And I really wanted to examine this. Like, I'm not lonely. I'm in community. I run a huge community of high impact women and underrepresented leaders. And all of a sudden, it was as if a light switch turned on. And I couldn't unsee it in my own community. That the reason that it's a small community, 500 people. That the reason that these high impact humans come together to support each other, to unlock opportunities. Is because who else are they gonna turn to? That there was no outside connection or understanding for them. And so, and I could then all of a sudden see it in my own life, that the moments in my life, in my career, that as I moved up in my career, they were deeply lonely, like crawl under the desk, lack of support, sitting on the couch, tears coming down my face because I did not have the support I needed. And so for me, that article and that realization really started this journey of trying to understand how do we create the connections and support we need? Now, my lens is very specific. I want to help women rise in their careers. And it turns out that loneliness, we did this research in 2023, loneliness was preventing women from moving into positions of greater power and influence. And when they got there, it was so lonely and crushing that they would leave their jobs. I want to help everyone, not just the 500 women in the list, find the connection, build their own list, build their own community, and to lower the barriers to access for that. That's where 10 minutes to togetherness comes in. It turns out, good news, that the things that you need to create connection and build your networks and rise in your career don't just work for women, they work for men as well. So this is not a men versus women. This is not a beards versus no beards conversation. This is for everyone, right? This is men are lonely, women are lonely, everyone's lonely. Turns out the same things will help everyone to find the support they need. The reason, sorry, one more thing, I will move on. The reason that I'm so focused on the workplace is we just did some research. 80% of all corporate workers are lonely because of their job, not just at their job, all because of their job. And so that's the piece that I'm very focused on. And that's my lens, my wedge into this gigantic topic. Thank you for having me here today. I'm thrilled for this conversation.
So, good afternoon. That's call and response. Good afternoon. I'm excited to be here. I'm Fred Riley. Official title is Executive Director of We, the Social Fabric Project at the Aspen Institute. A project started in 2018 by New York Times author David Brooks because he was writing about a ton of doom and gloom. But as he was launching the project, we called about 30 communities, a group of researchers, and we'd ask 3 questions. Who do you trust? Who shows up for people? Who's the leader in your community? And we didn't get a list of mayors or school board members, but we got a list of neighbors. And they'll say, oh, neighbor such and such feeds people after school, or the crossing guard here does this. We're like, so there are a group of people who just work in communities, doing service projects and connecting people all around this great country. What can we do? And so David started highlighting their stories. And when I joined, I was like, we got to do a little more than that. So we started funding their work. We started providing tools and resources. We started providing support mechanisms for these people in communities, because this isn't a new thing. This is how our country has always weathered tough times. It's through neighbors, and it's a title that we all have. And so our work is how do we unlock the potential of people in community to solve their own issues, but build social bonds while they're doing it. I came from a community. I was born and raised in Saginaw, Michigan, and I should not be at a place like the Aspen Institute, but like the Weavers who helped me to knit my life together. And so I selfishly want every kid around this country to grow up in a neighborhood where people care for one another and they support one another. I have a lot of titles. I'm a son, brother, godfather, and favorite Uncle Poo Poo. But one of the greater titles that I have and that you all have is a neighbor. And we all need each other to survive. And so I want to unlock the potential of people in community supporting one another and what that does to strengthen social impact, but also in social isolation.
I told you that we're in for a treat. We're gonna stay with Fred for a second and toss you the first question if that's cool. You talked a lot about weavers and neighbors, and I'm curious to hear what you have learned about how leaders can intentionally cultivate these pro-social values in their communities?
Yeah, oftentimes I think when we're thinking about big issues that are plaguing society, we are waiting for some congressperson or a senator or the president to ride up on a horse to come help us solve the issues, our local issues or our neighborhood issues. And if you all are waiting on them, you are going to be waiting a while. So, but around the country, we've seen people in neighborhoods who are showing up for people in these really amazing ways. And they do this because they focus on, the strength of the community. In Baltimore right now, Miss Erica and Miss Gloria bought homes in a neighborhood where there was this alleyway where they were finding dead bodies and mice and all sorts of stuff. And they were waiting, the people before were waiting on somebody to come solve this, but they petitioned the city and they said, we have a beautiful neighborhood with a lot of strengths. Give us the alleyway and let us build it up. So gave them the alleyway, they built a stage, and later on in the summer of last year, they hosted the Baltimore Symphony in this really tough neighborhood in Baltimore. But if they would have focused only on what was bad in the community, they would have never gotten it. They focused. Did I blow it? Sorry. But so I'll talk lots, but they focused on what was right and not the stats of what told them was actually wrong. And then they have the potential to see everybody as a leader. One of our weavers, and one of our last year's Weaver awardees, Anthony Satori, is working to support the mental health of young people. He suffered, if you're okay with me telling your story, you are going to be here and I was going to share your story, but not here. So, but he suffered from some a mental health crisis in college and decided that the administration wasn't doing anything. And so he needed to gather students up so they could support one another. And he did the same thing when he was working at a grocery store during the pandemic. He said that, all of us want to quit. We need some help. How can we get an extra 10 minutes so that we can gather ourselves before we go back into this tough job? Because working at grocery stores, we're a tough place. And now he's like traveling around the country, talking to people about the mental health of young people and supporting an entire community. Because our weavers see everybody as a leader. And then they make relationships the heart of the work, right? And so in Washington State, we had a group of weavers who saw during the pandemic that people were fighting against each other. They didn't know how to connect with one another. So they started creating these easy to enter into service projects, painting a mural, cleaning up a park. And they brought together a warring community through service. And so our weavers do this because they see the issue, but they see the heart in the work. They also connect people and see everybody as a leader, and they focus on what's working well and not what's wrong. And so those are the things that I think if you fold those into your work, that it'll bring out the human aspect of what we do every day.
Focusing on what is working well rather than what's going wrong is so powerful. And I think it also is something that requires so much compassion, which is something, Jared, that your organization really focuses on training people in compassion and resilience. Can you talk to us, you told us a little bit about the physiological changes that happen for folks when they start engaging in this work. Can you tell us a little bit more about these trainings? How do they translate into building more connection?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's that saying, an enemy is a person whose story you have not heard. And I think that's, and it's attributed to lots of different people, but I think when we're able to truly listen to someone's story, something shifts in us. It's a bell that you can't unring. Something happens to the relationships. And I think there's a critical need to create opportunities for folks to come together such that conditions exist for us to really speak and listen to each other in an authentic way from the heart. We work with the practice of counsel. Counsel comes from the Latin word concilium. It means a gathering of people coming together in a good way. And when you have an invitation to step into a container, and this is what we teach police officers, incarcerated folks, educators, nurses, when you create a setting where you can really take a backward step and become really present, ground yourself in present awareness, and allow yourself to listen to what's there, to really take a moment to really connect with those things that are in your environment. And then when people around you are speaking, to hear them with curiosity, with an open heart, not with judgment. We know how to do this when we're in nature. We listen to the sounds of nature, listen to like the sound of the waves at the beach. We don't have to agree or disagree with the waves to understand something about the surf. Or when the wind is blowing through the leaves, we can listen in a way that helps us understand. It doesn't require that we have a stance, or we have to take a position, or we make decisions about, who did that tree vote for, and who goes to their party, like where they worship, and what's their class, and how old are they? There are so many things that we apply to other humans that make it impossible for us to really listen to them, because we sort of close that aperture through which we listen by imposing so many judgments. Listening from the heart is a different way to listen to each other. And similarly, when you're invited to tell your story authentically, to say what is really alive in you, rather than to speak in such a way that you are trying to make a point, or achieve a goal, or intimidate or seduce, or act with some kind of intention. Speaking authentically is an act of courage, and it's an act of vulnerability. And when you are vulnerable, even if it's just telling a little story about something that made you laugh, or made you upset, or kept you up at night, or your favorite kind of cheese, and or the superpower you wish you had, or something, when skillfully facilitated, having folks share a story from their life and have it be something that is real encourages others to be vulnerable as well. When you create a vulnerability loop in a group of folks, something happens that is permission given. And when that permission is given, all of a sudden we lean in with a part of us that we don't usually feel is allowed. That leads to a kind of opportunity to build bonds. The bonds lead to relationships. Relationships lead to trust. People often get it backward. They think you got to trust people to be vulnerable. But I think it's actually the opposite. When you have a culture that encourages vulnerability in a container in which it's normed, trust emerges and relationships emerge. And we find ourselves connecting with others in ways we didn't expect we could. And this is something that we have done in 29 prisons in California, with rival gang members, with police officers who never expected to sit down with community activists, with folks on all sides of the political spectrum. If you just get folks talking about something that's true, and you do it in a skillful way, it does something to the room. It makes it feel as if it's okay to bring my true self. And I think that that quality is paying off in the programs that we've been offering. We have experienced, endless testimonials over 10, 15 years of people saying it feels so good to get this off my chest and feel that someone else has the same experience. We have Likert scales with, validated academic scales measuring anger and tolerance and a sense of hostility. What we now have is biometric evidence. We can use heart rate variability, in particular very low frequency domain, to actually look at autonomic health and to see where someone is at baseline before 3 months of this kind of activity and then after. And the results are really striking to us. What we see in terms of how folks not only report that they feel more connected, they have more well-being, they feel more engaged, but their health is improving as a result of that. And my wife is sitting here, she's a physician who's trained in integrated medicine, and the protocol that she developed has been so effective because of technology now enabling us to track heart rate variability. And so, we have a peer-reviewed paper that's, I think, going to sort of shift how we understand measuring metrics around whether social connection is something that you can actually encourage with an intervention and a dosage and see results from. I think it's time that we go beyond the fact that we know people feel good in these programs. We know that they feel more connected, to demonstrate scientifically that they're actually becoming healthier as a result of these. And so we can talk about all of the lifers who are now, granted grants of parole by the commissioners, all of the law enforcement officers who now feel that they are way more engaged and want to just spread the word throughout their agencies. What I'm so encouraged by now is that the story has a whole different level now that we have some science behind it. So the programs make me just thrilled to jump out of bed every day and be able to extend them. We have a partnership with the Department of Justice now to work with training law enforcement around the country and how to bring on board these skills of self-awareness, self-regulation, and connectivity. I think it's going to really transform the way we train folks in public safety, both in terms of the way police meet the community, but also how we can protect the health of those who are charged with protecting public safety as well.
What I love about the work that you're doing is that going a step further and thinking about how to translate the results and the outcomes into evidence, which is like what are this issue of loneliness and social isolation. We're in a period where we're trying to build that evidence base up about solutions and outcomes. So it's such important work. And you sort of shocked us all with a pretty big stat from when you started, which is that 80% of office workers are lonely because of work.
Yeah.
And what I'd love to hear is, I'd love to hear more about that, about what you're seeing as the reasons why, and what you're seeing folks in the community at the list do to sort of tackle this.
Yeah. I feel very honored to be on this panel because I'm really impressed by the work that everyone here is doing and like putting the research and the data into practice. And I just want to say how thrilled I am to be here. So thank you. The research we did this year, 80% of all corporate workers are lonely because of their job. There's more. 43% say that being at work is the loneliest time of day. It is, there are under 35-year-olds are more lonely than the folks who are more senior in their career. However, we know that the loneliness gets worse for women only as they rise in their career. Men report being more supported as they get more senior. It is, and it's worse for people of color who say that they can't show up to work as their authentic self. They feel they can't show up to work as their authentic selves. So it paints a pretty grim picture of corporate life. The good news on the other side of this is this research also helped us identify the people who are less likely to be lonely and more likely to say that they're reported. And like you call them the weavers, we call them the cultivators, right? And so the point is, you either want to be a cultivator or you need to know the cultivators, because 1 in 3 people in your workplace are doing the work to bring everybody together. And the one message that I want to leave everybody with, if you remember nothing else from what Anne Shoket said, is that it's tiny little micro habits of connection that the cultivators use in order to build and nurture their networks. Nobody has to go, there are no corporate retreats, there was no going to the bar, there are no boozy networking events, there's no boring networking events. You literally like barely have to get off your couch. And it is walking around the office and having human conversations with people. It is checking in on a diverse network, right? It is folks that you used to work for and folks that used to work for you and people that you work for currently and people that you used to work for. And there was a conversation earlier about it dotted throughout my day, but it's the idea that it's the loose connections that you want to keep warm. The idea that I also want everybody to hold on to is there are people out there who are rooting for you, who you are on their mind. Not all the time, occasionally your name comes up in a meeting. Somebody says, oh, whatever happened to? Those are the people that you want to keep these warm relationships with. And it's the 10 minutes comes from, again, my hero, Dr. Murphy. And in the report, what did we say? The advisory. They talk about the 20-year decline that we've had in time spent together. But if everybody spent 10 minutes a day intentionally building their networks, we would reduce that loneliness gap by half. 10 minutes. And so I spend my 10 minutes, sometimes it's a LinkedIn post, sometimes it's a call, very often it's some of that, frankly, I always love it when people call me for my 10-minute a day check-ins. I learned that from Susan McPherson, who many of you might know, who wrote The Lost Art of Connecting, to make a phone call during the day. And so this is the work, is to get people to, 1, recognize that you have some agency in building your networks. 2, it doesn't have to be hard. You don't have to like literally put on shoes.
There's one other piece of this, though, in the workplace that's really important. Is this is not something that individual workers can hack their way out of, right? It requires companies to recognize their role in reducing loneliness and not just give lip service to corporate wellness programs, to actually give funding to those corporate wellness programs, but also to bring collaboration and transparency. And it turns out, for everybody here who's in corporate, those dreaded all hands meetings that everybody is like, look, I don't work in corporate, but this is the face when my friends tell me about their all hands meeting that they make, right? But it turns out that these all hands meetings are your company's way of saying, we see you, we value you, we want your voice in the room. We're going to create an opportunity for you to understand across departments how things are working and who you can collaborate on. So, no more eye rolling, please, at your all hands meeting.
I'm gonna try, but.
In fact, when I heard that, I implemented an all hands meeting in our community. You asked me about what are some of the members of the list doing, and sort of the interesting thing, there are actually a few members of the list who are here in the room who are all doing their part in the space. Marcy Alvar is doing her work cross generation. Abelion Emma is doing her work at Hinge to bring the next generation into the room. And now not everybody is a community leader, but I think this idea of leading with transparency and authenticity. Although if you can get like rival gang members together, I feel like that occasionally there are some flare-ups in my own community that we could use some facilitation like that, and also in my family. But really that idea of vulnerability and transparency and daily micro habits of connection, right? That's what the list is about. It's about daily habits of connection and people coming together and keeping those like atrophied muscles strong.
I think my boss is watching and I love office at this meeting. No, I mean, I think one of the themes that's coming out for me in what all three of you talked about is that there are these folks who are weavers, who are cultivators, who are using the practice of counsel and are stepping up to take on that leadership role. How do we get more people to play that role in the communities that they're a part of? Do we need more people to play that role? Are there other roles that people can play when it comes to creating a culture of connection? This wasn't on the prep sheet, so I've gone wrong. No, so sorry.
So I totally think we need more people. I think as I think about the stats, 78% of Americans right now believe that if you have the opportunities, you'll take advantage of them, right? Our nation's trust is like, as people have less trust in our government and institutions and in our leaders, but the glaring number is that they don't trust their neighbors anymore, right? FEMA predicts that if you live in a community where the social connection and cohesion is low, if a storm blows through, the idea that your community will rebound is slim because you don't know your neighbor, you don't trust your neighbor, you can't count on them. And so we need as more people as possible to step up to say, I'm going to be the leader in this 2-block radius or this 4-block radius, because if we don't, like our country we've always been in this place in our country where if there's a need, everybody passes the hat and we support one another, right? After World War II, it was volunteers, weavers, who taught new Americans English as they settled home here. It was those same volunteers with the Red Cross who helped families on the grief journey, and then other volunteers who helped the young men and women when they return home to find jobs. We've always done this, and that's what makes our country a great place to be. We've just forgotten our path, and we have to usher people back on that road again.
I think because it is such a big umbrella that everybody has a piece, as you know, I talked with your boss about also, right? We talked about a responsibility for corporate, for technology, in the school, in your community, right? There is no one who doesn't have a responsibility to help tackle this problem. And I think that the realization that you can't do it all at once, and not every community is everything to everybody, and that not every community can even be everything to you, but what is your, where can you have an impact, right? A call to action for everyone to think about, how can you have an impact? This is an incredibly powerful movement of human beings. And to be able to chip away at the problem from your perspective, I think is a deeply powerful call to action for everybody.
I might add, we're talking a lot about policy and programs, and I think that the wording in Pillar 6 of the advisory it really talks about the value of informal practices of everyday life that have such a significant impact on social connection and really shape programs and shape policy. And those informal practices are really important to understand that you can't fake. You can't just pretend. People can smell it on you. If you don't authentically have a practice where you are engaging, where you are really committed to taking a backward step from the fast pace and the shortcuts and the heuristics and all the things that we do to kind of get efficient, and really ground yourself and connect in a way that allows you to set aside what you think is going on and really meet another person, really listen to another person from where they're at, meet them where they are. And in doing that, give them permission to be whoever they are in that moment, and follow that with your own willingness to show up authentically. That act of courage. Brene Brown says this all the time. There's no courage without vulnerability. You can't separate the two. And so being willing to really show up as your true self in ways that are appropriate, of course, but in ways that actually represent the fact that you're willing to be you in front of others and give them the opportunity to be themselves. I think practices like counsel give us a way to step in to this kind of arrangement and step out so that it doesn't eat our entire lives, and we can navigate it appropriately at the workplace, at school, at prison, roll call at a police department. But when you actually have an active practice of becoming present and connecting from the heart with others, it changes you. And the changing you affects others in direct ways. I think from a leadership standpoint, if we don't get that piece, we're in some trouble. If we don't realize the change begins with us. We tend to be a little bit shaky about what we're able to lead folks in.
So I think at this time, we want to open up the floor for questions. Think about what, we're still not, the mic's still not working? Okay, so if you have a question.
There's a mic in the corner that we've been told is picking up pretty well, and those online can still hear decently.
So if you could help our friends out online, and if you have a question, if you wouldn't mind standing up and projecting, and we'll sort of repeat the question and make sure that everyone can hear it. Any questions for our panelists? Let's go in the back.
I'll start. I'm Trey and I'm from Seide. I'm curious with the LEAP project, how, as a funder, do you find cultivators, those that you call weavers, to still do what they do, and you may formalize it because you're now making it a grant or a program? How do you keep it still genuine and authentic?
Yeah. So good question. And Anthony can attest to this. It's a micro grant funding that we have a larger funder who funds us. But the application process takes 30 minutes, just not, and if I'm lying, just tell me I'm lying, because I will. It's four questions, only one paragraph is like written or a video. A group of community leaders in that particular community chooses the awardee, so it's not even us. And we walk away and we'll come back later just for pictures or to make sure they get on the news. But outside of that, we move ourselves out of the equation. We believe that our space at the Aspen Institute our place of privilege is to open it up so that these weavers have a spot at the table and on stages. So typically when I do things like this, I typically will bring one of them along with me. Anthony has traveled to a couple different cities with us on the speaker circuit because we have a speakers bureau where we take them to a training and then allow them to go tell their stories around the country. This is not about we, but this is about what's happening in the community. And our role, we believe, is to create this army of people who are working in tandem around the country. So we take ourselves out of the equation.
Hi, my name is Larissa, also known as Lars, and I was just curious, I think in this work, loneliness, also digital wellness, one of the things that we're trying to really focus on is the research and the evidence-based impact. And I'm just curious, from a funder side of things, but also doing the work itself, the different types of scales and innovations that you're most excited about in terms of measuring and monitoring meaningful impact, because I think without those systems in place, it becomes really challenging to know collectively whether we're moving forward or not. And I think it's also highly resource intensive for probably a lot of the levers we fund to do that. So kind of curious about what are you most excited about, but also how can we make it more accessible for those people to have those metrics to then get more funding.
Yeah, so totally. I think one of the things I'm really excited about is last week we launched what we call is trustmap.org. And it's a bucket of research based on census data as to what trust looks like from zip code to zip code around the country. And so every neighborhood has a score based on trust behaviors, meaning do people vote? Do they donate to local causes? Trusting behaviors, we pull online activity, that's a little wonky, but it's data nonetheless. And then the trusting infrastructure. Are there places for people to meet in a community, right? And then attached to that are some really cool stories of what people are doing in communities to build trust in a particular neighborhood. And then over the next year, because it's census data that is recalibrated every year, we can go in and test the scores in every zip code around the country. I'm excited about that because it's a low bandwidth approach for weavers to show about the work they're doing in their community. But you can also find weaving opportunities in every community as well once you go to that trustmap.org as well. So I'm excited about that because it gives them data, but it also gives them solutions that they can tap into as well.
Can I piggyback onto that? I'm pretty excited. So we have a pretty extensive, as I said, pre and post surveys when we go into a prison, when we work with the police department, where we're really kind of digging deep into where people are pre and post. And then there's a ton of testimonial stuff, but we were noticing something in the way people describe their autonomic health. And I think maybe I'm going to ask Ann to just say if you don't mind, because what we were able to do now with this HeartMath technology, just on a very basic physiology level, is to get pre and post measures of individuals who are receiving an intervention and becoming more coherent. Can you just say what that is for a second? Because it's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, the things that we were noticing was that the LAPD cops were saying that my doctor told me I could stop taking my blood pressure medicine. I lost weight, I'm sleeping better. Which made me start to think there are things happening in the nervous system that's getting healthier over this 3 months time span. And the way we used to research was cortisol sampling, which was either a blood test or a salivary. Imagine getting a group of cops to spit into a cup 3 times a day. So HeartMath has devices that sense heart rate variability and programs that analyze that signal, both for quantitative information and qualitative information. And the quantitative we look at by measuring their HRV before the 3-month program and after. And we saw that shift, like Jared mentioned, the very low frequency domain gets better. That correlates with less risk for heart disease and hypertension and early onset dementia. But the other thing that we saw was that their patterns shifted and became more coherent. And in the survey data, we knew that they themselves were feeling more socially connected to each other as a result of this program. So I think what the research I want to do in Vermont, because we're going to have a very big group of people to work with there, is to hook up a bunch of people at the same time. Because I think that coherence is the physiologic state of social connection. And if we can show that that happens when you put people in proximity to each other, I think that's going to be really powerful. I think what the senator was saying earlier about we know a lot about each other. Knowing about each other is not being connected. It involves something that happens in your heart and the magnetic signal that we send to each other when we're in coherence.
Yeah, I just have to follow on the question on that. I'm sorry, Dan Barr. One, how hard or long does it take to measure that? I guess is a
A
practical
1 minute
question.
protocol in 5 minutes.
I love that. And the second part is, so is there a standard measure of the progress of social connection that then gets correlated to this? Or do you just know that because they're involved in the program, they are because of the activities they do?
You know, we let them each be their own control in the before and after. It would be really interesting to do it with a group that is a control group that is signed up to do this but hasn't yet done it. as long as they don't have connection to each other.
Yeah.
Because we know there's bleed over. Ones that are going through it, if they have access to the ones that haven't yet, they will start to transmit some of it. So really a good control group would be great.
Hi, I'm Kristen, a youth empowerment specialist at Plan International, and I have a question regarding the future. So I work primarily with Gen Z ages 14 to 22, even sometimes as young as 12, Gen Alpha, and I see just their ability to connect online very well, right? Going viral, having trends, but not even being able to make eye contact or talk to their neighbor or ask for help or any of those things. So what do you see the role of youth in each of your workforces, whether that's dating, in the workforce, in entrepreneurship, and what can we do to help the young people that we are either raising, friends with, or in community with?
Do you want to go?
I will jump in. I will jump in as someone who is raising a young, I have a 10-year-old and an 11-and-a-half-year-old. And you're absolutely right. We were talking today at lunch about communities, and I was thinking about my text messages are full of people who want to connect with my son on Roblox. And that's how they spend their time, right? Like that's meaningful time for them spent together. And in fact, when I was at 17, it was the rise of Snapchat, and Snapchat killed them all. Like all of a sudden you didn't have to leave your bedroom to see your friends anymore, and you could just, you didn't have to go to the mall. I'm sorry if anybody has invested in malls. Playing Snapchat, honestly, I saw it happen in a year. But I think that there's I don't think we're going back, right? I think that is the way that I see my children connect. It is the way the next generation is entering the workplace. And I think there is when I give corporate speeches, I do a lot of talking about seeing the generation that you are not as a window into experiences that you've not had yet. And I think that we really need to think about building a bridge, right? We're never gonna get all of these 11, 12-year-olds to like suddenly come into a town square and be as enthusiastic about it as they are about getting into their communities on Minecraft and Roblox. But at the same time, I think that as we think about they grow up, they move into the workplace, that we need to find other ways for those experiences of cross-generation, multi-level, to actually collaborate and not just be frustrated at the ways that they're communicating. I am not pessimistic, is what I'm saying. I think that it just requires a different lens.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, from a dating perspective, we're seeing for the first time, Hinge was built as an app for millennials who didn't grow up with dating apps. And what we're seeing now is that 18-year-olds who are coming on our platform, this is the first time they've ever dated. And they're learning to do it on an app. All of a sudden, that's a lot of responsibility for dating apps and for us to think about how we actually support people and fostering that connection. And so I think, tech companies, social media companies, dating companies, all of these places where people are spending time online have a responsibility to figure out how their products and policies, how they show up in the world might help enforce and reinforce this value of social connection and connectedness beyond a digital space, right? The two have to work in tandem. I agree. Like, I don't think 12-year-olds are gonna go. Remember when people used to go to the mall for concerts? We're probably not going back to that, but figuring out how we can integrate both sides of our digital lives and our lives.
And I just quickly say that we have seen incredible transformation in schools with educators who have lost connection with social emotional learning and find that something like counsel, when integrated into classroom for conversations around text to self connection. I mean, standards, teaching standards by getting folks to recognize the value of their voice in all ages. The school system transforms. Kids are way more engaged. Kids feel as if their voice matters and that what they have to say has a lot to do with what they're doing there, not just sort of receiving downloaded information. And so the transformation, even in academically oriented schools that open up to some of this work, has been really radical. And we're thrilled to work with educators and school systems that actually value this and are willing to access this kind of practice to reinforce these things, not just for academic performance, but in terms of self-esteem and communication skills and basic ability to be a human and communicate with human.
Does that shoot, and this is quick, intergenerational connections as early as possible. Hang out with your grandparents, it's a normal thing, how do you push that more? And then service, and not the type of service only to get in college or for you to capture so you can put on a reel, but the kind that helps to grow your heart and for you to understand what humanity is. Those are the two things that I believe would be the bridge that'll get young people over, so.
We're gonna take one more question, and then I'm gonna ask our panelists to share like a parting thought. Leave this in.
Clayton McKay, we work in senior living, but I'm interested in the standardization of the interventions, especially in the jail situation and your measurements. What are you standardizing? How are you able to replicate and scale what you're working on?
It's all manualized. It's all, a very specific protocol. We are interested in teaching folks a practice that can be sustained in the institution within the group itself. So we're basically train the trainers is kind of the orientation. There's a lot of science regarding the way stress affects us, the autonomic nervous system, how our bodies, how our minds, how our hearts and spirits are affected by the interactions, and then how to come into a circle and actually create the intention so that we can have a conversation where something emerges that will be a benefit to all of us. We teach folks the practice and then they sustain it, whether it's in a school, also in assisted living facilities, also in police agencies, as well as organizations. There are basically 4 days of training spread out over 3 months. We're there for 2 days. We give them assignments every week and then we come back twice and they own the practice and then continue to let it. So what we're measuring is pre and post the 3 months, but it's built to be sustained.
So, Fred and Jared, a parting thought that you want to leave us with.
So starting with Fred, so a parting thought is that, the issues of loneliness and isolation, and I'll couple with all the issues that you hear the stats on in the news, are all human issues. And it's going to take humans for the solutions to them. And as we said earlier, I think everybody in this room and everybody listening in has a part in it. So figure out your part. There's enough tools and resources out there, and just get active in something because it can change an entire community. Also, if you need some inspiration, my comms director is watching in. Go to trustmap.org. There's some amazing stories about how you can get involved in communities and some of the great things that people are doing all around the country. That's my part of it.
My parting thought is marching orders. 2 things that I would like you to do before you leave this room. 1, go to 10minutes-to-togetherness.com and download our research report and our toolkit. And if you forget, I hear that it will be on a QR code at cocktail hours later on. And 2 is think about who are you going to reach out to today? Who is on your 10 minutes list? You can think about it tomorrow, but tomorrow morning, think about who, do a check-in. How are you doing? How can I help you? You've been on my mind. Really simple.
Well, I guess I have to give a website too. But beyondusandthem.org, I'm so blown away by things I've got to see amongst people I never expected would have the courage to drop their identification and connect with others and what it's done for their lives. We've got a lot of material, a lot of videos. There's a lot that will surprise you. Ann and I will go to a police precinct and within a couple hours we'll get comments like, so is this sorcery? Are you doing sorcery on us? Because this is not what cops do. And all of a sudden people are crying and we don't understand what's happening. Just the power of presence is an extraordinary thing, but it begins with us. And we have to settle ourselves. We have to really commit to be present in the moment, figure out some practice to do that, and open our heart to be able to see the other without judgments. It's a thing we practice all the time when we're not with humans. when we apply it to other humans, we'd be surprised how much is there and how much we recognize as resonant with themselves.
Well, I just want to thank you for sharing so much with this group today. Thank you so much for the questions and the audience that you've been here and present with us. I've learned so much about your work, but also how we put these values into practice and how we start to think about replicating them in all of the spaces in which we go. And I learned a bunch of websites. So thank you so much.